Welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone had an enjoyable time mingling among the Remo tables and Remo bombing old friends and meeting new ones, all like-minded and focused on some of the same issues that we're all focused on. Well, the last panel was a hard act to follow, but I think this new panel is well equipped to follow it. We are now moving to our immigration and human rights panel. That panel is moderated by Michael Lukens. Michael is a good friend of mine, a good member of Washington Council of Lawyers. He joined the Capital Area Immigration Rights Coalition in 2014. He's responsible for overseeing the screening and placement and mentoring of pro bono cases with members of the private bar. He also serves, well, he really serves as the CARE Coalition's liaison to law firms and the broader nonprofit community. And he also directly represents children in removal proceedings. He also oversees all aspects of the CARE Coalition's operations. Before joining CARE, Michael was a senior associate at Paul Hastings, where he focused on environmental matters and served as that firm's pro bono coordination for their DC office. In addition to all of these responsibilities, Michael has worked on many direct representation matters for pro bono clients, including immigration, of course, nonprofit governance, landlord-tenant, and contract matters. He had received his JD from Hofstra School of Law. I will now turn it over to Michael to introduce his fellow panelists and begin the panel discussion on immigration and human rights. Michael?
Yeah, there's the microphone. Thank you, Mark. And if the panelists can turn on their camera, we'll dive in. There's David, Umber, Sam, and Lori of all, and I'm going to actually ask the panel to introduce themselves, but let me tee up a bit what we're going to talk about for the next hour. So this is my 4th or 5th year moderating this panel for the Summer Forum, and every year it's different, and every year what I try and do is really let your questions guide us. So if you have any questions at any time, post them in the chat. We will see them. And I mean, listen, we're all attorneys. We will happily talk for an hour straight. We do not have a problem with that. But I really want this to be value added for you, the audience. So please post your questions and let us follow your lead. The group that I have assembled is awesome. It is a varied group of how people are engaged in this incredibly important issue. I am at CARE Coalition. I do a little bit of direct rep, but mostly management these days. But we have some impact work, some policy work. We have pro bono work from the private bar. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And I'm going to just go right across my screen and start with Umber. If you could introduce yourself, tell us where you work and a little bit about what you do.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Umber Qureshi. I'm a staff attorney at the National Immigration Project. Just a little bit about our organization. National Immigration Project is a national membership-based organization. Our members range from lawyers, law students, advocates, who are specifically working on the intersection of immigration law and criminal law. So if you aren't a member, if you're a law student or a lawyer and are interested in getting involved, please do check us out. And just a little bit about my work. I primarily work in kind of 3 buckets. One is our impact litigation work. A lot of it is sort of federal court litigation around issues, kind of at the intersection of immigration and criminal law. I also do a bunch of legislative work, I think solely because I live close to DC. That's part of the job. And I also work pretty closely with our local partners, so community organizations, advocates, activists, in kind of helping them do, the hard work of kind of changing policies and changing laws and changing minds on the ground. So I'll stop there and looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. So just going across the screen, Dave, you're up next.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. I'm David Friedland. I'm a lawyer with Beveridge and Diamond here in Washington. I'm sort of the private law firm practice representative. I've been doing, and our firm has been doing immigration work, pro bono immigration work with the CARE Coalition now since about 2003, when we had our very first client who was a survivor of the Rwandan genocide that I'll talk ad nauseum about if you let me in a few minutes. But we have been partners with CARE Coalition for lots of years. I currently have 2 cases pending, just finished 2 or 3 others. And the work is wonderfully satisfying because our clients are in such need, but it also trains young lawyers beautifully in all the skills that you need to manage cases, evidence finding, fact gathering, motion doing and motion preparing, arguing in court, that kind of stuff. So it's just been a wonderful partnership, and we look forward to continuing to do it, and I'll look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you, David. Sam, if you could talk to us.
Hey everyone, I'm Sam Shea. I'm a senior attorney with CARE Coalition's Immigration Impact Lab. CARE Coalition is a nonprofit here in DC that specializes in representing individuals in immigration detention. I'm part of the Immigration Impact Lab, which focuses on impact litigation. And so in terms of the kinds of cases I work on, I'll do habeas cases where we're trying to get people out of detention. We do have some fear-based appeals, such as like asylum cases, withholding cases. And I also represent people in criminal cases, which deals with the intersection of criminal and immigration law.
Thank you, Sam. And Lori, just last but not least, but you're also just last screen.
Great. Thank you, Michael. So my name is Laurie. I'm the legal director at Ayuda, which is a nonprofit in the DC area. We have offices in Virginia, DC, and Maryland, and we provide legal, social, and language access services to low-income immigrants throughout those 3 states, or 2 states and the district. My work includes some direct representation, but like Michael, it also includes a lot of management at this point, which includes not only overseeing our immigration law program, but also our family law program that serves immigrant survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking in both DC and Maryland. And our unique project, which we call Project End, which is focused on immigration legal services fraud, as well as, and this is one we've gotten into a bit through referrals from CARE, through other fraudulent schemes targeting low-income immigrants. I'm really proud that Project End has become a place that you call when something really unfair is happening to low-income immigrants in this area and you don't know who else to call. And Project End has become a great responder in those situations. In addition to overseeing our direct services, I also work closely with our team on any of our appellate work, a limited amount of federal litigation that we do, and a limited amount of policy advocacy that we do, and then coordinating our services with our in-house social services and language access program to make sure that we are living up to our promise of holistic services for our clients.
Excellent. Yeah, I don't do a lot of like raise the roofs. That's just not who I am, but Project End is awesome. It's worth taking a look at their website. And for the panelists, like feel free as I'm asking these questions to just unmute yourself and chime in. I'm gonna start with a question that I actually got the other day, which I thought was interesting when I was doing another training for law students, which is, what is it like to work system? I think we all understand that the US immigration system is broken. It has been broken for many years prior to the former administration. It is still broken. What is it like given taking on a pro bono case or spending your days working through that system? What's it like for you? Okay, I'll call it David. You're first.
Yeah, I'm not the person in the panel that sort of does this day to day, but the short answer is that our clients' lives in this field are so in such danger that each individual case that we can win is a victory. And the system is broken, the system needs to be fixed, but you sort of, at least from my perspective in the cases that I take on, you just have to dredge along, trot along, and keep your clients' issues in the forefront and realize that if you save one life, you've saved the world, kind of thing. And so that's kind of in my mind how I can work within a broken system on an individual case and solve an individual problem, if that's helpful.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So is that everybody else's? Sorry, please. I was trying to unmute. Go for it.
Yeah. So in terms of my background, I actually came from like an appellate background working at the Fourth Circuit. And so it was really interesting for me personally to go from that like very far removed, like sterile, very like legal, solely focused on the legal issues environment to like seeing how individual people's lives are being affected by the immigration system. And while I had immigration experience before, it was just like really eye-opening and really shocking just to see like due process violation after due process violation, like all the crazy things that happen in immigration court, which is basically like the wild, wild west in terms of like procedures and fairness. And now that I've been working like in this field for a couple of years, I'm starting to be like a little bit more like disillusioned and used to like how unfairly our clients are being treated. But every now and then ICE will do something where it is like really shocking. But in terms of like how that affects our work, I think it really, for the most part, it really energizes us because every single, like just to piggyback off of what David said, every time we get a win, it's just so amazing. And it's just like so satisfying. And even like when we get little wins that not in terms of like just the immigration judge or a district court judge, like really appreciating the full humanity of our client, it also is just really affirming. At the same time, it also goes the other way. Sometimes we do get kind of worn down by just how unfair and how terrible everything is. So I think it's a balance of both perspectives.
Yeah, I totally agree with all that. I think what has helped me at least, and Michael, when you first asked that question, I was gonna go on a rant about jurisdictional bars, but I won't go there. But in sort of broad terms, approaching the work with a recognition that there's like a huge power imbalance, with sort of litigation in the immigration world. So there's like power imbalances in terms of the parties. So you'll have a non-citizen on one side and, the federal government on the other side, in terms of the courts with, a lot of not great judges on the bench. And in terms of the law, where the law is typically, not on the side of the non-citizen or of the immigrant. And so navigating that, has been very frustrating, and you have to work extremely hard and put in a lot of hours just to get a win, a win that's like the easiest choice from like a moral perspective. But yeah, like others have said, when you do get a win, those kind of keep me going until the next one.
Yeah, I certainly echo the importance of celebrating the seemingly small victories. I think particularly in recent years, we've tried to embrace the idea that there are no small victories. Every victory counts. And that has been really important because it's just exhausting to work in such a very broken system. And I think two other pieces that have been important for me and for many of my colleagues have been focusing on our clients' resilience, because that is remarkable and is something that can help us on the days that we are exhausted. and also taking on the pieces of systemic advocacy that we are able to. And IUDA is primarily a direct services organization. That is who we will always be, but taking on some impact litigation, taking on some federal court cases to challenge particularly unfair results in certain cases, taking on some policy advocacy has been an important part also of fighting the system, not only on the individual level, as David began by speaking about, but also on a level that sort of throws our hat in the ring in one more effort to try to bring about change with all of us, trying to make it a little less broken in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And just as an example, it's not always big things that are broken. Sometimes it just doesn't run well. And I've been ranting about this lately. We submitted a green card application for a client who has asylum in August of 2019. And a couple weeks ago, we got a receipt notice, not an adjudication, but they literally finally admitted that they had received the mail that I knew they had because I had a certified receipt notice. So all of you mentioned like the victories, the things that keep us going. Talk to us about like a recent or like a really big moment or a victory that you really want to tell the crowd about, and sort of give us that hope that goes with the broken system. It's your time to shine, David. I'm ready. Your story is amazing with your client.
Well, I have to see if I can do the sort of moderate version. Our Rwandan client was, when he was in grade school, was forcibly conscripted into the Rwandan Patriotic Front, which is essentially the Tutsi army. Then he was in Uganda during the genocide and therefore managed to survive the genocide. The genocide, of course, was the Hutus murdering 800,000 to 1 million Tutsis. So then, since he was a Tutsi and since he had been in the military for that many years, he formed part of, he had a position in the new government in Rwanda, the new government of Paul Kagame, who was the post-genocide ruler, we'll just call him for now. However, our client supported someone else, candidate for president, at which point he was thrown in jail, he was tortured, his businesses were taken away. He was asked to go to another country and help commit an assassination, which he refused to do. But then he got word that his life was in danger, and so he fled the country, came to this country, landed at Dulles Airport and asked for asylum, at which case we got the case from the CARE Coalition and took over. And we made the argument that, of course, he feared for his life if he was going to return because the government was going to kill him. We actually lost at the trial court level because I don't know if it was Lori who you mentioned or one of you, some of the horrible judges that we have. The trial court judge found that he himself was a perpetrator because he was part of the current government, and the current government was actually, there were indeed revenge killings of the Tutsis by the Hutus who had just murdered, 1 million of their people. There was no factual support for it in the record at all. It was purely supposition on the part of the judge. So we had to win on appeal. So of course we won on appeal at the Board of Appeals, and he was awarded asylum in 2005 or so. Then we got asylum for his wife. And then in 2010, we got asylum for his 4 children, and they came to this country. The children at that point were from middle school through high school and spoke a little bit of English, but not much. And so we had to, we helped nurture them through the process of going to school. And fast forward to 2 weeks ago when we attended the wedding of one of the children, of the second oldest girl who had gone to high school, then had attended Penn State Harrisburg and gotten a degree in engineering and is now sort of merging into the professional class. Not all the children have that great a success story, but But the case for me is life-changing. It's life-altering for me as well as for them. And so the work that we do, that all of you do more full-time and that I do every now and then, is yes, it's a broken system, but the victories that we achieve are really life-altering. Both they will be for you if you take on the case, and they clearly are for our clients who have endured so much in their home countries. So I'll move on. That's just one, but there are a lot of others, and I'm sure you all have other good stories too.
And that's such an amazing story. And I have a client who I've been working with for 5 years who still gets my name wrong. So maybe there's a little bit of both, but it's, let me move. Who else wants to dive in after that wonderful story?
I'm happy to. I can talk a little bit about some of our litigation in Georgia. So some of you may have heard of Irwin County Detention Center, where there were a lot of national headlines about this one particular doctor in Georgia who was conducting invasive gynecological procedures on the women who were detained, non-consensual procedures on women who were detained at Irwin County. I think late last year, so before National Immigration Project got involved, there were a lot of law clinics who had filed like individual habeas petitions to keep the women from being deported and releasing the women so that they could participate in federal investigations into this facility. We kind of joined their team, this team of attorneys, consolidated all of the cases and filed essentially a class action, on behalf of all of the women who were subjected and who are witnesses of these procedures, both for sort of injunctive relief and damages. And that lawsuit is still going on, and we're still, fighting for their rights. But slowly, over the past few months, all of the women who were detained at Irwin County were released. And just a couple of weeks ago, or maybe last week, the Biden administration announced the closure of the Irwin County Detention Center, which, it wasn't just our litigation. There was a lot of incredible organizing happening on the ground in Georgia that really led to this fantastic result. And, we're very pleased that all of our clients are now released and home with their families.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I want to build off that. I want to build off what you're saying with one of the questions from the crowd, which I'm going to paraphrase, which is essentially the issue around immigration and human rights was so front and center in the news during the Trump administration. And the question is, how do we keep this movement going now that Biden is president and people seem less engaged? Lori, what do you think about that?
I think we have to just keep, as the people who are in the movement all day, every day, keep elevating our clients' voices and concerns, and really working in partnership with the advocacy groups and community groups that are led by individuals and communities that are immigrants, that are recent immigrants that have been touched dramatically and are continuing to be affected dramatically in their day-to-day lives by the policies that, frankly, by and large, remain in place. I think a lot of us in the field look forward to the change in administration because it wouldn't be quite the same relentless assault that the last 4 years were. And I think that's been largely true, and there have been some improvements, and some of them have been meaningful. But I also try to get out in front and talk about the ongoing problems. There are 3 that have never gone away, not under the Biden administration, not under the Trump administration, not under the Obama administration. And their deportation, detention, and denials, many of them wrongful, right? So detention, way up, right? Under the Biden administration. Deportations, this isn't an easing problem. And denials, we continue to see really valid applications for relief denied by immigration judges who might be bad actors. I mean, we have individual judges that we know if it's case type X, we are going to lose. And there is literally nothing that we can do to change that. It is 100% a case for appeal, and it has been that way for decades. And we also see that at the agency level, where we are seeing adjudicators deny applications that are clearly meritorious, and the denials are frankly on grounds that are offensive. And so we can't pretend that that's not happening just because it's not the same relentless assault that it was before. And we've also seen, continued use of Title 42 to expel people at the border, which is a new and special problem. So it began under the Trump administration, but it absolutely continues today. We see remaining inaction. I think that it was a fair hope that we were going to be seeing some change in some of the big, terrible cases that the administration has the power to change in the immigration system in June. I think that was a reasonable hope when we thought about some of the changes we saw when Obama first took office, and we thought about when those came down. And I'm not expecting those in June anymore. Maybe others are, but I'm not. And I think we also see the administration picking up litigation positions that, frankly, we expected them not to push, and they are. And so we can't pretend that just because it's not the same relentless, offensive assault that we saw before, that things have reached a point that we can, for even a moment, accept. And so I think getting out in front of that when we're talking to other lawyers is really important, and making sure to elevate the voices of immigrant communities in this country in any forum we possibly can is another piece of that puzzle. But I definitely don't have the answers here.
I love the 3Ds, and I would add another one, which is dollars, which is the federal budget needs to stop. Just my own personal opinion. Money always flows to more ICE officers, more facilities, more CBP, instead of caring for people. And frankly, we could use a lot more judges to get rid of a backlog. And maybe some e-filing would be nice at some point that actually works. But the dollars are a problem. Sam, what do you think?
I don't have much to add. Laura, you basically covered everything that I was thinking of. Yeah, I mean, we still have, I totally agree that we were expecting the administration to be doing a lot more in terms of rescinding all the terrible policies that came out under the Trump administration. And some things they could be doing very easily, but they're surprisingly not. For example, we are plaintiffs in litigating the death to asylum rules that came out during the Trump administration. And for those who aren't super familiar, it was really all-encompassing new regulations that made it incredibly difficult to apply for asylum at any stage of the process. And we won a preliminary injunction during the Trump administration. And so right now those regulations aren't in effect, but the new administration still isn't making clear that these regulations don't apply, and these regulations are still all over their websites. So I think there's just a lot more that they could be doing in terms of rescinding bad policies, but also making what the details of the current law clear so that it can actually help people.
It's a fascinating time, and a lot of broken expectations, I think. David, your firm's an interesting case study. Have you seen a drop-off in interest in immigration pro bono cases under this administration versus the last?
No, we haven't, and mostly because the cases are still the same. I mean, individuals are still, the gangs are still going after people in Honduras and El Salvador and Nicaragua, those places. And so therefore the cases that you all put out for law firms to accept are still the same, regardless of what the administration is doing. The individuals are still, our clients are still trying to manage their way through. So we have not seen a drop off at all.
Yeah, and that that's been our experience now that COVID is starting to pass. And we were very concerned that we would see donations drop. Those who gave to us financially would stop, and that so far has not been the case, which I think is great. I want to move to this next question, which I think is a great one. And Umber, if we can start with you, which is, how do you do this work if you're saddled with enormous student debt and families to take care of? Which I think is just a fascinating and wonderful question for this audience.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think, I was fortunate enough to be able to work in like a nonprofit organization coming out of law school with, a decent loan forgiveness program that I'm relying on still. And I, not having a family to take care of, even though the student debt is still like looming over my shoulder. But I was still like in a very fortunate place. And I know a lot of people aren't. There's lots of ways to do this work. You don't have to take a job at a nonprofit to be able to do this work. So like, David was mentioning, if you join a law firm, there's going to be pro bono opportunities to work on different cases. And honestly, we rely on pro bono law firm partners in almost every litigation that we do because we can't do it alone. There's one case that we have right now, which is in federal court, where it's just 4 nonprofits working together, and discovery has been a pain in the butt, where you could have a law firm who can assist with that, and they do a really, really great job typically of working on these cases. So you don't have to feel like you can't do this work if you don't join a nonprofit, and so those concerns are definitely real, and it's going to depend on every individual person and their situation. But definitely, stay involved if you care about this issue.
Other folks, tips, ideas?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that another option in terms of the immigration field is just working at like an immigration firm that does asylum, but maybe also like business immigration. So yeah, just another option in terms of if you want to pursue a career in this field.
And I actually never worked for the government, or at least I haven't since undergraduate years, but I do think there are important roles for people to play within the government. And typically that pay is a lot higher than legal services. So it's another option that might allow you to be more focused on these issues full time, while still in some cases being able to take advantage of loan forgiveness options that I think were critical for all of us, and have an effect on these issues. And that can be within certain positions within the US government. And I think you would just need to, I think, find mentors who have been in those roles who can help you work through some of the really hard days that are going to come in those positions, and thinking about where your lines are and when you will decide that that's not something that you're willing to be part of anymore, and how you will react if that day ever comes. But I think that that's another option. And I also think that, especially we saw recently, and it would be great to see this sustained in the Biden years, I guess maybe post-Trump, but I would love to see it sustain, that we saw a lot of local government involvement in immigrants' rights issues that, for me, seemed like a level we had never seen before. And that was coming from some of the general counsel offices in states, counties, and cities. It was coming across the country. They were bringing lawsuits, with standing based on their government status, but essentially on behalf of the immigrant residents of the places that these counsel offices represent. They were submitting really important amici briefs in a lot of the litigation that all of us participated in and continue to participate in. And they were funding critical programs to provide direct legal services to immigrants in need of legal services living in those jurisdictions. So I think local government is also another option for people who might need something where economically the pay is going to be better than direct legal services in most cases, but you could still be focused in a very full-time kind of way on these issues.
Yeah, that's all great advice. And one like really practical tip is if you are thinking about this work and relying on loan forgiveness, really make sure that where you're going to work is going to qualify and will support you. I have heard from colleagues at other organizations that say like it's a giant pain to get paperwork signed, or I was working here on the border and then all of a sudden loan forgiveness rules changed. So really think through that as you're signing up for things. Actually, I think, Lori, that was a good segue to another question here, which is, do you think there is a place for pro-immigrant lawyers to work at DHS and ICE or ICE? And it says, or if we find ourselves wanting to change the system, is it better to advocate outside? Who wants to tackle that one?
I think it depends. I think probably all of us have had a moment in a case where someone on the inside made a difference for that individual client, and having that kind of power, if you are able and willing to use it, can really matter. And depending on your position, you might be in a place where you could make bigger change. I think it's important to temper your expectations. If you think you're really going to be able to completely change the system, and think about, again, sort of where are your limits and what are you comfortable being part of. And I think that's a different answer for different people. So certainly I think there is some good to be done on the inside. If you're trying to maximize your impact, I think unless you're going in at a really senior level, if you're just thinking about where can I do the most good, and unless you're going in at a really senior level, if that's your only question, I think the answer is probably not inside the government.
Yeah, I think it's fair, right? I mean, it's nice when we interact with like asylum officers who care and are client centered versus the ones who are clearly not, but they're not changing the system. Other folks, what do you all think about this question? Umber, Sam, what do you think?
I don't have much else to add on that. Yeah, I think it kind of is a decision from person to person, but I agree. I think, especially if you're thinking about starting out at, DHS or ICE, it's unlikely that you'll be able to make, systemic change. And I think it's also a matter of thinking about, kind of how much you'll be able to take in that position, because there's going to be a lot of times where you will probably have to, make a decision that doesn't necessarily align with what you want to do.
And I think, this is a safe space. We can all be very honest. If you get a resume on your desk for someone who wants to join your organization as a staff attorney and they spent 4 years as an ICE trial attorney, how are you going to react to that, Sam?
That's actually kind of a funny question. I mean, full disclosure, I never worked for ICE. I did intern for the Office of Immigration Litigation for the DOJ in law school. I mean, under the Obama administration, but still not great. To be honest, I would look at someone who worked for ICE for that long with a little bit of suspicion. But I do want to say that even though deciding to work for government is a personal choice, and you will probably end up having to do something that you don't agree with or aren't okay with morally, I think going from a career in working in government to becoming an advocate for immigrants, you really provide a different perspective. And I think someone who has that unique experience really can add a lot of like helpful intel and input to the advocacy realm. But then again, I think that situation is pretty rare, and I think it is very tough to make that transition.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts on our hypothetical ICE trial attorney?
Not on that, but can I also add? So now let's say you've decided to go to a law firm because you have $300,000 worth of debt and you really can't, afford to make the salaries. I think it's fair to say that virtually all law firms allow pro bono work and encourage pro bono work, at least on paper and at least theoretically. And I say that because my advice is going to be to the young folks out there is that you should not be afraid to direct your own career. That is to say, you go to firm X and you say, I really want to do immigration work. I want to represent clients in asylum proceedings and the like. Almost always, I think you're going to get the answer yes. And you're going to be seen as someone who wants to represent people who most need it, but B, you're going to be getting your trial experience and all that kind of stuff, which is very valuable to you, to the law firm, to the clients, to the greater good as a whole. So you should not be afraid to make that request because I think in most cases it will be granted. Secondly, you should probe the firm's commitment a little bit because everyone says they're committed to pro bono, but not all firms really are. So for example, will the firm give you credit in a billable hour sense for every hour spent on a pro bono case? I think a lot of them will, and that's a good thing. Some won't. But that's something you should probe also, and not just kind of accept what's told to you, but dig underneath and see if that's really, if the place you're joining is really the kind of place you want to be because they're committed as you are committed. And it will inure to your benefit, to the firm's benefit, and to the client's benefit. And the firm will look at you as a go-getter, as someone who's directing his or her career. So you can't go wrong with that, in my view.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you are really dedicated to doing this type of work pro bono, like David's saying, I've had a number of folks looking at firms reach out to me and say, I am doing on-campus interviewing at this 6 firms. What do you think about them? And as David said, most of the time I say they do pro bono, they do a good job, but I've had to say that firm talks a big game, but they're not great for pro bono. Obviously, I say that in confidence, and every firm that we work with is absolutely wonderful, and I love them all. But David's right. There are varying levels of commitment to this work at different firms. I want to ask the question that's in the chat, and I think you all will have interesting questions or interesting answers. How do you identify what issues are ripe for advocacy? What avenues do you use to pursue that advocacy, and how can that be done at a local level? And go, because I don't know how to answer that question.
Talk a little bit about this from a litigation perspective, because that's my job is. So I'm really fortunate to be working at Care Coalition, an organization that does both direct representation and also impact litigation. And so when we're thinking about whether to bring an impact case on a specific issue, I think one of the first things we do is we talk to our direct rep attorneys and see what exactly the issue is on the ground, how prevalent it is, and what exactly is going on, how it's affecting clients. And then, of course, there's also a lot of legal considerations, like, is this a viable case? Is it jurisdictionally barred, which happens a lot in immigration cases, unfortunately. And also, so a lot of discussing amongst ourselves, but also when you are thinking about bringing impact litigation, you also have to consider how it's going to affect people, not just in your own jurisdiction, but also like across the country. So there is a very, there's a lot of discussion that goes on between a lot of these impact litigation groups and attorneys, just to make sure that we're all on the same page and in agreement, and we understand what's going on before like a big case like the big case is brought.
Sorry, I had to turn my camera off for a second. I had children running by at like Mach 2 all of a sudden, but I am back. Umber, Lori, do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that Sam said. That's basically what we consider, when looking at impact litigation cases as well. I think one of the things that's also important to my organization is looking at sort of what the context is in terms of advocacy on the ground that's happening. So we'll typically support or try to support as much as possible, issues where there is a lot of active organizing happening on the ground, just because, our sort of general theory of change is not that change will happen through litigation, but, litigation is just one part of this broader strategy to push the public and push policymakers to effectuate change. And so, that's also kind of one of the main considerations that we take into account. And in terms of the strategy, I think it really varies. If litigation is not an option, we'll think about, federal advocacy, see if there's relationships in DC that we have that we could leverage, or just supporting the organizers on the ground. I just submitted a FOIA request for some organizers in Virginia who wanted information about police collaboration, local police collaboration with ICE, and we were able to get some useful data, and that helped with their organizing effort. So I think the strategy really varies based on the issue and the context, but those are some of the considerations.
That's great. So I want to pivot us right now from sort of what the world looks like to, I think, a really pressing question for people in law school or going to law school, which is, how do I get a job? I need to I need to get paid someday. And there's a couple in here, but I want to split it into two. When there's one question that I think is interesting, we usually get it every year, which is, are there classes you would recommend to take in law school or activities that will help someone be prepared to hit the ground running? Lori, what do you think?
Clinic. Experiences and opportunities at different law schools are different. If your law school does not have an immigration law clinic, or if you're not able to get a spot in it, because I know that is often a problem, any direct legal services clinic will help prepare you for an immigration legal services job. So if your first choice is an immigration clinic and it is not offered, or you can't get in, think about what is going to involve a direct relationship with a client. What is going to help me learn how to help a client tell their story in a strategic way to achieve a goal in a court or a court-like process? What is going to give me an opportunity, this is available at some places but not others, to juggle something of a caseload, to have more than one client and learn how to do that. And so that's my answer for class. That's my answer for an activity that will prepare you. I think those are hands down the best opportunities available to people. They were hands down the best opportunities and experiences available to me. And they're some of my best memories now too.
Umber, Sam, any other classes or activities? I think the clinic one is, right at the top for sure.
Yeah, let me just second that. I was in the law students in court clinic at school, and you learn how to marshal evidence, how to interview clients, how to respond to clients that don't have phones, that don't return phone calls, that often you go out and you visit clients. You're in court from the very beginning. You're doing motions practice. All of that is all transferable into the immigration context, it seems to me.
Yeah.
I wonder, Michael, I was thinking about this question. I'm an environmental lawyer mostly, and in that world, I would say you do not have to take an environmental law course because you learn it all very quickly on the job. I think it may be a little bit different in the immigration world because the statutes and the regulations and the forms and the language is all so complex. It seems to me, and I'd be curious what others think, it seems to me it would be useful to take an immigration course in addition to the clinic if they have it in law school. My answer would be different for what I primarily do, environmental law, but I think for immigration law, that would be helpful to have that good background.
Yeah, I agree with that, David. I think clinics for sure. I think there was one semester where I was only doing clinics and I had no classes. So it was basically like a full-time job, which was great. But the one class that was really helpful, I think, in my job was my immigration law class. And yeah, for the reasons that you mentioned, that it was just getting like an overview of the INA before I was able to start was just incredibly helpful.
Yeah. Sam, any other classes or things you would add? I think there's one that we're forgetting.
Yeah, in terms of classes, I think admin law
Yeah,
definitely.
There it is.
That would be really helpful.
Yep.
A lot of immigration law has to do with the regs and administrative bodies, so highly recommend taking admin law. If you are thinking about doing impact litigation, federal courts, really helpful class. Also, just want to agree with what everyone said about clinics. If you aren't able to get into a clinic, I think another good option is looking for an internship where you're able to get a lot of hands-on experience, like maybe be in court, at least be able to draft like briefing in a case. So I think those are all really good options to seek out.
I wish I had known while I was ignoring my admin law professor better attention at the time. So this leads me to the next part of the question, which is about essentially resumes. So it is, I think sometimes there is a misconception that it is less competitive to find jobs in the nonprofit sector than it is, in the private sector. And that is not the case for those of you wondering. And it's often not the case because we don't have enough money to hire all the people we would want to hire. So there's less spots available. What do you all see on resumes that piques your interest or makes you want to bring someone in for an interview? Or how does someone break into the organization so you even know who they are? What's your advice on that very nuts and bolts question about finding work? Laura, you want to go first?
Sure, though I'm afraid most of my tips go back a good bit before you're writing your resume. But frankly, for us, if you don't speak a language other than English fluently, it's just really hard for you to compete. And it's not that you can only speak Spanish, but I think speaking something, and ideally something other than English, that is relevant to our client communities. So in our job postings, we typically list between 5 and 7 languages that are most relevant to our client communities. But even if you don't have one of those, but you are fluent in something else, it also says something, I think, often about your commitment to the field, about the likelihood that you've engaged in some thought or training or lived experience related to cultural humility and cross-cultural work that's really important in the immigration field. So I think that's important. And I think a resume that tells a story sets people apart. And I say this as someone whose career has been completely nonlinear. So it's not that you have to choose a perfect thing at every juncture or at any juncture, but being able to thread together your descriptions of what you did in different jobs so that it's catered to what you're trying to do now is really important. It has to be truthful. Don't overstate what you were doing, but you can pick the things that are most relevant. So if you were in a clinic that was not an immigration clinic, but you were helping clients tell their personal stories to achieve a litigation goal, that's really important. That's a really close parallel to what we do. So if you can draw it out in those descriptions and thread it together in a more obvious way in your cover letter, I think that will get you in the door at a lot of places. I know at IUDA, we're really committed to a broad swath of telephone screens. So if we think you might be qualified for the position, we are very likely to do an initial, very short phone interview with you, in part to make sure that you don't have to know a secret password to get in the door. You don't have to have had a previous internship experience with us or with Care Coalition so that Sam or Michael calls me and says, so-and-so is great. We're trying to break that down. And one of the ways we break that down is if your resume and your cover letter make it look like you're probably qualified, we will try to have an initial conversation with you. And so I hope that a lot of places are adopting hiring practices similar to that or better than that, so that it's not about knowing the secret password. It's about telling your story to the hiring authority in the paperwork that you submit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say to those of you listening to what Lori's was just speaking to, don't think that because you're David's next door neighbor and David and I are friends and work together that your resume is going to get any more than a second look. And sometimes that's a real negative if that's the way you feel like you're going to get into the organization. Sam?
Michael, can I add to your question? Because I'm curious about, do Sam and you guys, do you hire students directly out of law school, or do you like to see 2 years of training elsewhere before you hire young lawyers?
We're all about young
Let
lawyers.
me add that to your question. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like most of our hires are right out of law school. Lori, is that about the same for you?
I wouldn't say that's been most of ours recently, but our most recent hire is someone who's just about to graduate. So we certainly do it. We love being able to do it. If we can train a person, if we can build a person's habits, if we can know sort of exactly how they came into their first years of practice as an attorney, that's really all upside for us. So I think that's our ideal, though I also, sometimes it is very helpful if we get an opportunity to hire someone who's recently barred, but hasn't had a long history of practicing somewhere else. It can be a smoother transition for us and certainly lower risk to take someone who's already licensed.
So we have 3 minutes left. So I want to give Umber and Sam a chance for your final awesome tips for everybody. And so all the pressure's on you to wrap this up well.
Yeah, I think, for folks who are sort of just starting out in this practice area, one tip that I would give is, definitely know what supervision style you prefer, and try to communicate that early. So in my first year, I was actually hired, straight out of law school, and I was fortunate enough to have a supervisor who was very hands-on, and I really preferred that. And I was going to her anytime I had, the smallest of questions. And as I got more comfortable, we kind of sat down and I told her that I'm, kind of more open to taking on more leadership roles and more responsibility and would prefer a more hands-off approach. And she was very receptive to that, and that's been working really well. And kind of relatedly, don't be afraid to ask for help early on. Especially when you work at a nonprofit, you'll see everyone stretched so thin. They're doing like 50 different things every day. But folks are, generally always willing to help out younger attorneys however they can. Even if it's not, they can't give you a whole lot of time, they'll point you to resources that are able to help you. And so don't be afraid to just reach out and ask for help when you need it.
Yeah, those are all really great points, Umber. I do want to provide a little bit of hope for people who don't speak a second language. Totally agree with Lori. It can be really difficult to get a job in immigration law if you don't speak another language, and a lot of positions will be foreclosed to you. I think a lot of direct rep definitely foreclosed, but I think it's still doable if you bring like a different perspective or like different experience, or if you're willing to focus in areas where a second language isn't as necessary. So for example, like impact litigation, federal court litigation, If you want to be focused on like crimin issues, where I think many of the clients will speak English, then I think those are definitely potential paths forward in this field. I mean, at the same time, I think I also highly recommend picking up a second language, but I understand that's not really doable or feasible for a lot of people.